Step back or I'll have you removed." The sentence didn't echo, it cut, sharp and immediate, like it had been said 100 times before and never once questioned. The glass lobby of Rains Tower froze at 9:14 a.m., the kind of silence that doesn't belong in a place filled with polished marble, quiet keyboards, and six-figure conversations. Malik Rains didn't move. Not when the words landed. Not when the security guard shifted his stance to block the entrance completely. Not even when a few heads turned, curious but cautious, measuring the situation without stepping into it. Malik stood there in a fitted black t-shirt, dark denim, sneakers that had seen miles instead of spotlights. Nothing about him asked for attention. And yet, somehow, the entire room was watching him now. Connor Blake, head of security, adjusted the cuff of his sleeve like he was settling into control. He didn't raise his voice again. He didn't need to. "You're not authorized to enter this building," he said, slower this time, each word spaced out like policy instead of opinion. Behind him, the revolving doors continued spinning, but no one walked through them. It was as if the entire front entrance had become a stage. Malik's eyes moved, not quickly, not nervously, but deliberately. He took in the front desk, the cameras angled above the doorway, the reflection of himself in the glass panel to his left. He had seen that look before. Not here. Not this building. But the same expression. The same assumption. The same quiet decision made before a single word was exchanged. At 22, it was a leasing office in Chicago. At 27, it was a private investment firm in New York. And now, years later, standing in front of a tower that carried his name in contracts no one in this lobby had ever read, it was happening again. Malik exhaled slowly. Not frustration. Not anger. Just recognition. A young receptionist behind the desk glanced up, then down again, her fingers hovering over her keyboard like she wasn't sure if she should type or watch. Near the elevators, a man in a grey suit leaned slightly to the side, pretending to check his phone while angling his camera just enough to capture what was unfolding. No one stepped in. Not yet. Connor took a step closer, closing the space that Malik hadn't tried to claim. "I'm going to ask." "You one more time," he said, his tone tightening just enough to signal escalation. "Leave the premises." Malik finally shifted, but not backward. He adjusted his watch. A small movement. Almost insignificant. Except it wasn't. "You have 60 seconds, Malik said calmly, his voice even, controlled, like he was stating a fact no one else had access to yet. Connor let out a short laugh, the kind that comes from certainty, not humor. "Or what?" he asked, tilting his head slightly, already convinced of how this would end. Malik didn't answer right away. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and held it there for a moment, his thumb resting against the screen. The lobby felt different now. Not louder. Not chaotic. Just charged. Like something invisible had shifted direction. Malik tapped once. Override building authority. Level black. The words were quiet. Measured. They didn't demand attention, but they carried it anyway. For a second, nothing happened. Connor's expression didn't change. The receptionist blinked, unsure if she had even heard what was said. The man by the elevator leaned in just a little more, trying to catch the moment that didn't seem like much, yet. Malik lowered his phone. His posture didn't change. He didn't look at Connor. He didn't look at anyone. He just stood there, as still as he had been when the first words were thrown at him. And then, somewhere deep in the building, something responded. The response did not come as a bang. It came as a shift so subtle most people would have missed it if they were not already watching. A soft click echoed from somewhere behind the walls, the kind of sound that did not belong to the lobby but to the systems buried beneath it. The receptionist's monitor flickered once, just a blink, and her fingers froze above the keyboard as if the machine had suddenly started thinking for itself. Connor Blake did not notice it at first. He was still focused on Malik, still standing firm in front of him, still convinced that control sat comfortably in his hands. You think saying something into a phone changes anything? Connor said, a faint smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. This building runs on protocols. You do not override those. Malik did not respond. He did not need to. His silence was not empty. It was waiting. Across the lobby, the man in the grey suit lowered his phone slightly, eyes narrowing now, sensing that something had shifted even if he could not explain what. The revolving doors slowed for a moment, then resumed, but the rhythm felt off, like the building itself had taken a breath. Behind the front desk, the receptionist glanced back at her screen again. This time her expression changed. Confusion first. Then hesitation. Then something else. Connor, she said quietly, not loud enough for the room but enough for him to hear. He did not turn. Not now, he replied, dismissing her without breaking eye contact with Malik. But the screen in front of her did not return to normal. Lines of text began updating on their own. Access logs. Clearance levels. A name appeared at the top of the system interface, bold and unmistakable, pushing everything else down the screen like it no longer mattered. She swallowed. Connor. I think you need to see this. This time there was something in her voice that broke through. Not fear. Not panic. Just certainty. Connor's eyes flicked toward her, annoyed at the interruption, but when he saw her expression, something in his posture shifted. Just slightly. He turned halfway, enough to glance at the monitor. That was all it took. The confidence that had been sitting comfortably on his shoulders began to loosen its grip. What is this? He muttered, stepping closer to the desk. The receptionist moved aside without saying a word. The screen reflected in Connor's eyes now. A profile. A clearance level higher than anything he had access to. A designation that did not belong to any visitor, any employee, or any name he had ever processed through this lobby. Behind him, Malik remained exactly where he had been. Still. Composed. Watching nothing and everything at the same time. Connor straightened up again, turning back toward him, but the energy was different now. Not gone. Not yet. But cracked. This system glitches sometimes, Connor said, more to himself than anyone else. It does not change anything. Malik finally looked at him. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. Just with clarity. You have 40 seconds left, Malik said. The words landed heavier this time. Not because they were louder. Because now, there was something behind them. The man by the elevator raised his phone again, this time openly, no longer pretending. A second person nearby. Followed. The air in the lobby was no longer neutral. It was leaning. Connor reached for his badge instinctively, tapping it against the security panel beside the entrance as if to remind himself where authority lived. The scanner beeped. Once. Then again. A pause. Then a different tone. Not the usual confirmation. Something else. He frowned, pressing it again, harder this time, as if force could correct what was happening. The panel remained unresponsive. Behind the desk, the receptionist took a step back. She was no longer typing. She was watching. Malik's phone remained at his side. He had not touched it again. He did not need to. Whatever he had set in motion was already moving. And it was not slowing down. Connor Blake stared at the panel like it had betrayed him. The silence around that single failed scan stretched longer than it should have, long enough for people to notice, long enough for doubt to begin forming in places where certainty had lived just seconds ago. He pressed the badge again, slower this time, watching for the green light that had never failed him before. It did not come. Instead, the panel gave off that same dull tone, flat and final. Behind him, the receptionist took another step back, her eyes no longer moving between Malik and Connor but locked onto the system display that continued updating in real time. Lines of authorization scrolled upward, replacing older records, rewriting the hierarchy of the building as if the structure itself had decided to correct something overdue. Connor cleared his throat, straightening his posture as if resetting himself would reset everything else. "System delay," he said, louder now, turning slightly so the room could hear him. "It happens during internal updates." But his voice did not carry the same weight anymore. It sounded like it was trying to hold on to authority rather than naturally owning it. Malik said nothing. He did not need to challenge the explanation. The building was already doing that for him. Near the elevators, the man in the grey suit lowered his phone just enough to whisper to the woman beside him, but his camera stayed pointed forward. 2 more people had begun recording now, their movements less cautious, more certain that whatever was happening was worth capturing. Connor stepped back toward the desk, this time fully turning his attention to the screen. "Pull up." "Full access logs," he instructed, his tone sharper, more urgent. The receptionist hesitated for a fraction of a second before complying, her fingers moving carefully, as if she was afraid to interrupt what was already unfolding. The system responded instantly, faster than usual, as if it had been waiting. A detailed profile expanded across the screen. Name. Clearance level. Ownership classification. The words were not subtle. They did not hide behind codes or abbreviations. They were direct. Absolute. Connor leaned closer, his eyes scanning quickly, then slower, then stopping completely. The air in the lobby shifted again. It was no longer just tension. It was recognition beginning to take shape, even if not everyone understood it yet. "That is not possible," Connor said under his breath, but the words were loud enough to be heard by the receptionist standing inches away. She did not respond. She did not need to. The screen was speaking clearly enough. Malik adjusted his stance slightly, just enough to signal that time was still moving. 20 seconds, he said. The countdown was no longer abstract. It was real now. Measurable. Connor turned back toward him, but this time there was no smirk, no controlled confidence, no easy dismissal. There was calculation. Fast, urgent calculation, trying to make sense of something that refused to fit into the version of reality he had been operating in just moments ago. "Who are you?" Connor asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. It was not aggressive. It was not authoritative. It was something else entirely. Malik met his gaze, calm as ever, his expression unchanged. "You already saw the answer," he said quietly. Behind Connor, the receptionist's screen emitted a soft confirmation tone, different from the earlier alerts, cleaner, final. A notification appeared across every terminal connected to the lobby system. Access hierarchy updated. Primary authority recognized. The words did not need explanation. The meaning spread through the room faster than any announcement could have. The man in the grey suit took a step forward now, no longer pretending to stay uninvolved. The woman beside him leaned in, her eyes fixed on the display. Even the employees who had tried to keep working were no longer looking at their screens. They were looking at Malik. Connor's badge beeped again, unprompted this time, and he glanced down instinctively. The small screen on it had changed. Status: restricted. The shift was undeniable now. Not just in the system, but in the room. Malik did not raise his voice. He did not step forward yet. He simply stood there, exactly where Connor had told him he did not belong, while everything around them adjusted to a truth that had already been there all along. Connor Blake felt it before he understood it. The shift was no longer subtle. It pressed into the room, into the floor, into the glass itself. Authority had moved, and it had not asked for permission. He looked at Malik again, but this time he was not looking down at someone trying to get in. He was looking at someone the building had already recognized. The difference was immediate. The difference was undeniable. "There has to be an error," Connor said, but the words came out thinner now, like they had lost weight on the way out. He turned back to the receptionist, his voice tightening. "Rerun verification. Full system. Now." She hesitated, not out of defiance, but because the system was already ahead of him. "It already verified," she said quietly. Twice. The confirmation sat there between them, heavier than any raised voice could have been. Connor's jaw tightened. He reached for the desk terminal himself, typing faster now, pulling up deeper layers of access, searching for something, anything, that would return control to him. But every screen told the same story. Every line pointed to the same name. Malik Raines. Primary authority. Owner-level clearance. The words did not flicker. They did not hesitate. They stayed. Behind them, the lobby had fully stopped pretending to function normally. Conversations had died mid-sentence. Phones were no longer hidden. People were watching openly now, their expressions shifting from curiosity to realization. The man in the grey suit stepped even closer, no longer concerned about being subtle. A woman near the entrance whispered, "Wait, what does that mean?" No one answered her, but they all knew something had changed. Malik finally moved. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just one step forward. The kind of step that does not ask for space because it already owns it. Connor instinctively moved to block him again, but something in his body hesitated. Just enough. Just long enough. Malik stopped within arm's reach, his presence calm, grounded, unshaken. 10 seconds, Malik said. Connor swallowed, the sound small but audible in the quiet. He looked down. At his badge again, as if hoping it would correct itself. It did not. The restricted status remained, bright and unmistakable. He tapped it once more against the panel, slower this time, almost careful. The system responded immediately. Access denied. The tone echoed louder than before, not because of volume, but because of what it meant now. Malik's gaze did not leave him. "You built your authority on access," Malik said, his voice steady, controlled, not loud but impossible to ignore. Doors. Permissions. Decisions. Connor did not respond. He could not. The structure he relied on was unraveling in real time, and there was nothing for him to hold on to. Malik continued, "But access was never yours. You were just assigned to manage it." The words landed clean. No anger. No emphasis. Just truth. Behind Connor, the receptionist's screen updated again. A final notification appeared, simple and absolute. Security command reassigned. The message did not need explanation. Connor saw it. He felt it. The role he had been standing in seconds ago no longer belonged to him. Footsteps echoed from deeper inside the building now. Not rushed. Not chaotic. Controlled. Deliberate. A second security team approached from the internal corridor, their posture different, their direction clear. Not toward Malik. Toward the desk. Toward Connor. The shift was complete. Connor stepped back without realizing it, creating space where he had once blocked it. Malik did not follow immediately. He let the moment settle, let the room catch up to what had already happened. The people watching were no longer unsure. They were witnessing something precise. Something final. Malik took another step forward, passing the line Connor had drawn minutes earlier as if it had never existed. No one stopped him. No one spoke. The building had already decided. Malik paused just inside the threshold, turning slightly, not to the crowd, but to Connor. "You said I did not belong here," Malik said quietly. Connor did not answer. He could not. Malik held his gaze for one more second, then added, "The problem was not that you did not know who I was." The words hung there, unfinished, but complete enough to land. And in that silence, with the system reset and the room fully awake, everyone understood. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a reckoning that had already begun. The second security team did not rush. They did not need to. Their presence alone carried enough weight to shift the final pieces into place. 2 men and 1 woman in dark suits moved with quiet precision, their steps measured, their eyes focused not on the crowd, not on Malik, but directly on Connor Blake. The difference was immediate and visible to everyone watching. This was not a confrontation. This was a transition. Connor noticed it too. He straightened instinctively, trying to reclaim some fragment of the authority he had just lost, but it did not land the same way anymore. The posture was there, but the system behind it was gone. "What is this?" Connor asked, his voice tight, controlled, but carrying an edge that had not been there before. The lead officer stopped a few feet away from him, maintaining a professional distance. "Mr. Blake," he said calmly, not raising his voice, not adding pressure, just stating the name like a fact that had already been processed. "Your access has been reassigned. We need you to step aside." The words were clean. Direct. Final. Connor blinked once, then again, as if his mind was trying to catch up with what had just been said. Reassigned, he repeated, the word unfamiliar in his mouth now. By who? No one answered immediately. They did not need to. The answer was already standing behind him. Malik Rains had not moved far. He stood just inside the entrance now, his posture unchanged, his expression calm, his presence no longer questioned by anyone in the room. The building had already spoken for him. The system had already confirmed it. And now, the people were catching up. The receptionist stepped slightly to the side, creating space where there had once been tension. Her eyes moved from Connor to Malik, and something in her expression shifted. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. The man in the grey suit lowered his phone for a moment, shaking his head slightly, as if he had just realized he had been watching something far bigger than he expected. Connor followed their gaze. Slowly. Reluctantly. He turned back toward Malik, really looking at him now for the first time, not as someone to stop, but as someone he should have recognized from the start. "You could have said something," Connor said, the words slipping out, quieter now, stripped of their earlier confidence. Malik met his eyes, steady, unshaken. "I did," Malik replied. "You just did not listen." The sentence did not land like an attack. It landed like a conclusion. Behind them, one of the internal officers stepped forward, holding a small tablet, the screen already open, already displaying the updated authorization structure. He did not hand it to Connor. He held it where Connor could see it. Clear. Undeniable. Malik's name sat at the top. There was no higher level above it. Connor's position, once listed beneath, was no longer there. It had been removed. Not hidden. Not suspended. Removed. The silence that followed was different from before. It was no longer tense. It was resolved. The crowd in the lobby shifted again, but this time it was not uncertainty driving them. It was understanding. A woman near the entrance exhaled softly, almost like she had been holding her breath without realizing it. Someone else lowered their phone, not because the moment had ended, but because it had already said everything it needed to say. Malik took another step forward, now fully inside the space that had been denied to him minutes earlier. No one moved to stop him. No one even considered it. The doors behind him continued their quiet rotation, but the energy of the room had settled into something new. Something clearer. Malik paused briefly, his gaze moving across the lobby, not to assert dominance, not to claim victory, but to acknowledge the shift that had just taken place. Every person in that room had seen it. Every person would remember it. He turned slightly back toward Connor, who now stood just outside the invisible line he had once defended. "This was never about access," Malik said, his voice calm, even, measured. "It was about assumption." Connor did not respond. He could not argue with something that had already proven itself. The lead officer gestured gently toward the side. "Sir," he said again, respectful but firm, "we need you to come with us." This time, Connor did not resist. He stepped back, slowly, the movement small but heavy with meaning. The space he had once controlled was no longer his to stand in. And as he moved aside, the path in front of Malik cleared completely. No barriers. No questions. No doubt. Malik Raines continued forward, not hurried, not slowed, just steady, as if this had always been the direction he was going. Because it was. The lobby did not return to normal. It could not. Not after something like that. The air carried a different weight now, quieter but heavier, like the room itself had learned something it could not unlearn. Malik Raines moved forward with the same steady pace, each step measured, each movement controlled, not performing for the room but fully aware of it. The marble floor reflected him now in a way it had not minutes earlier, not because the surface had changed, but because the perception had. People stepped aside without being asked, creating a clear path that had not existed before. It was not forced. It was instinctive. Respect replacing hesitation in real time. Behind him, Connor Blake had stopped resisting the shift. He stood near the side now, no longer blocking, no longer directing, just present in a space that no longer responded to him. The internal security team remained close, not crowding him, not rushing him, just there, their posture calm but unmistakably aligned with the system that had already made its decision. Connor glanced once more toward the main entrance, toward the line where he had stood so firmly just minutes ago. It looked smaller now. Less significant. Like a boundary that had only existed because he believed it did. At the front desk, the receptionist slowly returned to her station, but she did not sit. She kept her eyes on Malik as he approached, her expression no longer uncertain. "Good morning, sir," she said, her voice steady, respectful, the tone shifting naturally now that the truth was clear. Malik gave a slight nod, acknowledging her, not lingering on the moment, not holding it against her. He understood the difference between participation and pressure. The man in the grey suit stepped forward again, this time lowering his phone completely. "I think everyone just learned something," he said quietly, not directly to Malik, but loud enough to be heard. Malik did not respond. He did not need validation from the room. The moment had already defined itself. Near the elevators, a young employee named Daniel Harris, barely 24, who had been watching from the beginning, finally spoke, his voice uncertain but honest. "I have seen this before," he said to no one in particular. Different place, same energy. No one disagreed. Because they had seen it too. Maybe not all at once. Maybe not this clearly. But now, in this room, it had unfolded in front of them without interruption, without distraction, without anything to soften it. Malik reached the center of the lobby and paused for just a second, his eyes lifting toward the upper levels of the building, the glass balconies, the offices stacked above, each one part of something he had built long before this moment. A memory moved through him then, not loud, not overwhelming, but present. Years ago, standing outside a corporate office in downtown Dallas, holding a folder filled with proposals, being told to wait outside because someone thought he was in the wrong place. The same pause. The same look. The same assumption. He had not argued then either. He had simply left, built something bigger, and returned to spaces like this on his own terms. And now, here he was again. But this time, the system had spoken first. Malik lowered his gaze, the present snapping back into focus as the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. The timing was precise. Perfect. The building responding not to a request, but to recognition. One of the internal security officers stepped forward slightly, his voice respectful. "The executive floor is ready," he said. Malik nodded once, then turned his head slightly, looking back toward Connor, who remained near the edge of the lobby. Their eyes met again, but this time there was no tension, no challenge, no need to prove anything. Just clarity. Malik spoke, his voice calm, controlled, carrying across the space without needing volume. "You were doing your job," he said. Connor blinked, surprised, not expecting that. Malik continued, "But you stopped seeing people. And that is where you lost it." The words did not accuse. They defined. Connor looked down briefly, then back up, but he did not respond. There was nothing left to defend. Malik turned back toward the elevator, stepping inside without hesitation. The doors remained open for a moment longer, as if giving the room one last chance to absorb what had just happened. The people watching did not move. They did not speak. They just stood there, holding on to a moment that had shifted something deeper than policy or position. As the doors began to close, the reflection of the lobby folded into the polished metal surface, and for a brief second, everyone could see it. Not just Malik. Not just Connor. But the truth of the moment itself. And then the doors sealed, and the building continued. But nothing inside it was the same anymore. The elevator doors closed with a soft, controlled finality, sealing Malik Raines inside a space that responded to him without hesitation. The moment the doors met, the tension from the lobby did not disappear. It shifted. It followed. Inside the elevator, the air was quieter, insulated from the eyes and whispers below, but the weight of what had just happened lingered, steady and undeniable. Malik stood alone, his reflection staring back at him from the polished steel walls, calm, composed, unchanged. He did not check his phone. He did not adjust his posture. He simply stood there, as the elevator began its ascent, smooth and silent, moving floor by floor through a building that now recognized him without question. Outside, in the lobby, the stillness broke slowly. Not with noise, but with movement. People began to breathe again. Conversations returned, but softer, more measured, as if everyone was aware that they had just witnessed something that could not be undone. The man in the grey suit exhaled and shook his head slightly. That was not just about him, he said quietly. That was about all of us. No one disagreed. Near the front desk, the receptionist sat down slowly, her hands resting on the keyboard but not typing yet. She looked at the system screen again, the same name still displayed at the top, the same authority level that had rewritten everything in seconds. She swallowed, then began to work again, but her movements were different now. More careful. More aware. Across the lobby, Daniel Harris remained near the elevators, still processing what he had seen. He glanced toward Connor Blake, who stood near the side, no longer the center of attention, no longer the one directing the flow of the room. Connor's shoulders had lowered slightly, not in defeat, but in realization. The role he had carried had been taken, not by force, but by truth. One of the internal officers stood beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. "We will need to complete a formal review," the officer said calmly. Connor nodded once, slowly, his eyes still moving across the lobby, as if seeing it for the first time without the authority he once held. "I understand," he replied. His voice was quieter now, not weakened, but grounded in something new. Back inside the elevator, the numbers climbed steadily. 10. 11. 12. Each floor passing without interruption, without delay, as if the building itself was clearing the way ahead. Malik's eyes remained forward, but his mind moved briefly backward. Not to dwell, but to acknowledge. A younger version of himself, standing outside doors like these, waiting to be seen, waiting to be allowed in, learning early that access was often decided before identity was understood. That memory did not bring anger. It brought clarity. It always had. The elevator reached the executive floor with a soft chime. The doors opened smoothly, revealing a different kind of silence. Not the tense quiet of the lobby, but the controlled calm of power that did not need to announce itself. The hallway stretched out ahead, lined with glass offices, each one carrying decisions that shaped companies, contracts, futures. A woman in a navy suit stood near the entrance, already waiting. She stepped forward as soon as Malik appeared, her posture precise, her expression focused but respectful. "Good morning, Mr. Raines," she said. "Everything is prepared." Malik nodded once, stepping out of the elevator without hesitation. The floor responded instantly. Lights adjusted. Screens activated. Doors unlocked in sequence as he moved forward, each system recognizing him before he even reached it. It was seamless. Effortless. The exact opposite of what had happened minutes earlier downstairs. As Malik walked down the corridor, employees within the glass offices began to notice. Heads lifted. Conversations paused. Not because of confusion, but because of recognition. This was not a man entering for the first time. This was the man everything had been built around. Back in the lobby, the ripple continued. People began to speak more openly now, sharing what they had seen, what they had felt in that moment. He never raised his voice, someone said. He did not have to, another replied. Connor heard it. Every word. But he did not interrupt. He did not correct. He simply listened, standing in a space that had changed around him, understanding now that the moment was never about control. It was about perception. And perception, once broken, does not return the same way. Upstairs, Malik reached the end of the corridor and stopped in front of a set of double doors. They opened automatically before he could reach for them. Inside, a large conference room waited. Screens already active, documents prepared, a team standing by. Malik stepped inside, his presence filling the room without effort, without announcement. And as the doors closed behind him, the next phase began, not as a reaction to what had happened below, but as a continuation of something that had always been his to lead. The conference room did not react with surprise when Malik Raines entered. It reacted with readiness. Screens along the walls adjusted instantly, shifting from idle displays to active dashboards. Data aligned. Documents surfaced. Every seat at the long glass table was already occupied, not with confusion, but with expectation. These were not people who questioned who he was. These were people who had been waiting for him. Malik walked to the head of the table without hesitation, his pace steady, his presence filling the room in a way that required no introduction. The woman in the navy suit from the hallway followed a step behind, placing a tablet at his position before stepping back. All divisions are online, she said. Legal, operations, compliance, and investor relations are standing by. Malik nodded once, his eyes scanning the room briefly, acknowledging each face, each role, each piece of the structure that moved because he allowed it to move. Begin, he said. The word was simple, but it carried weight. Across the screens, live feeds activated. A compliance officer spoke first, her tone precise. We have completed a preliminary review of the incident in the lobby. All system logs have been captured in real time. No alterations. No delays. Malik did not interrupt. He listened. Always first. Security protocol deviations have been identified, she continued. Specifically, discretionary enforcement based on subjective judgment rather than verified credentials. The phrasing was clinical, but the meaning was clear. The room understood it immediately. Malik leaned back slightly in his chair, not relaxed, but composed, his fingers resting lightly against the edge of the table. Pattern, he asked. One word. Direct. The compliance officer nodded. Yes. This is not isolated. There have been multiple flagged interactions over the past 6 months involving similar decision patterns at entry points. The room shifted, not physically, but mentally. This was no longer about a single moment. It was about a system that had been allowed to operate unchecked. Malik's gaze moved to another screen where a timeline began to populate, each entry representing a decision, a judgment, a moment where someone had been evaluated before being verified. He had seen this before. Not just in his own life, but across industries, across institutions that claimed neutrality while operating on something else entirely. A man on the far side of the table, head of operations, spoke next. We can issue a statement. Frame it as a training gap. Address it internally. Malik's eye shifted toward him. Not sharply. Not aggressively. Just enough. The man stopped speaking. The room went still for a second. No, Malik said. The word landed clean. No explanation yet. Just direction. He stood then, slowly, not out of urgency, but out of clarity. The room adjusted with him. People straightened. Screens followed his movement, reorienting as he walked toward the center display. This was not a training gap, Malik continued. His voice remained calm, but it carried through the room with precision. Training teaches process. This was perception. No one interrupted. No one disagreed. Because they had seen the footage. They had heard the words. They knew exactly what he meant. Malik reached the center screen and tapped once. The lobby footage appeared instantly. Not edited. Not filtered. Raw. The moment replayed. Connor standing firm. The words. The pause. Malik's stillness. The shift. The override. The room watched in silence, even though they had already seen it. Because now, they were seeing it through a different lens. Not as observers. As decision makers. Malik let the footage play for a few seconds longer, then paused it at the exact moment Connor said, "You are not authorized to enter this building." He turned slightly, looking back at the room. That sentence, Malik said, was not about access. He let the silence sit. It was about assumption. The word settled into the space, heavier than any raised voice could have been. The compliance officer nodded slightly. The operations head lowered his gaze. The woman in the navy suit remained still, but her focus sharpened. Malik stepped back from the screen, returning to the head of the table, but he did not sit. "We do not correct this with statements," he said. "We correct it with structure." The phrase shifted the entire direction of the room. This was not damage control. This was redesign. A legal advisor leaned forward. "What are you proposing?" Malik met his gaze directly. Immediate audit of all access points. Every location. Every shift. Every decision made without verification gets flagged. He paused, letting the scale of it register. And we rebuild the system so that no one's perception can override identity again. The room absorbed it. This was not a small adjustment. This was foundational. Back in the lobby, the conversations continued, but the building itself had already moved on to the next phase. Because upstairs, decisions were being made that would reach far beyond that moment. Malik finally sat, his posture steady, his voice quieter now but no less certain. What happened downstairs, he said, was not the problem. The room waited. He finished the thought. It was the evidence. And with that, the meeting shifted fully into motion, not reacting to what had happened, but ensuring it would not happen the same way again. The room did not rush into action. It moved with intention. Every word Malik Raines had just spoken settled into the structure like a command already understood before it was given. Screens updated again, this time not reacting, but aligning. Departments shifted from observation to execution. The compliance officer leaned forward slightly, her fingers already moving across her tablet. "We can initiate a full audit sweep within the hour," she said. "All entry logs, all overrides, all discretionary calls." Malik nodded once. "Not just logs," he said. "Context." The room paused for a fraction of a second, adjusting to the precision of that instruction. "I want every decision tied to a reason," Malik continued. "If someone was denied, I want to know why. Not the policy. The actual reason." The distinction mattered. It always had. The legal advisor glanced toward the operations head, then back to Malik. "That level of review will surface patterns we cannot contain quietly," she said carefully. Malik met her gaze without hesitation. "Good," he replied. No hesitation. No reconsideration. The word carried forward, removing any thought of limiting the scope. This was not about controlling optics. This was about exposing truth. Across the table, the head of investor relations shifted slightly, his expression thoughtful. "If this becomes public," he said, choosing his words carefully, "it will draw attention." Malik did not look away. "It should," he said. The answer came just as clean. Because attention, when directed at the right thing, was not a threat. It was a correction. The room absorbed that. The conversation was no longer about risk. It was about responsibility. Malik turned slightly, his eyes moving back to the paused footage on the central screen. Connor's image stood frozen mid-sentence, the moment preserved exactly as it had happened. Malik studied it for a second, not with judgment, but with clarity. Then he reached out and let the footage continue. The room watched again as the shift unfolded, the override activating, the system responding, the structure correcting itself in real time. When it ended, Malik turned back to the table. "We do not fix this by removing one person," he said. "We fix it by removing the space that allowed it." The statement reframed everything. This was not about an individual failure. It was about an environment that made that failure possible. The compliance officer nodded, already adjusting her approach. "We will expand the audit parameters," she said. "Not just security. All client-facing positions. All decision points." Malik gave a slight nod. That was the direction. Near the far end of the table, a senior analyst spoke up, his voice measured but direct. "There is something else," he said. "If we remove discretion entirely, we risk slowing down operations. Every decision will require verification." Malik listened. He did not dismiss the concern. He considered it. Then he responded. "Speed is not the priority," he said. "Accuracy is." The words landed with quiet force. Because in that moment, everyone in the room understood that what had happened downstairs was not fast. It was immediate. And immediate decisions, when based on assumption, carried consequences that no system should allow. Malik stepped away from the table again, walking slowly toward the window that overlooked the city below. The skyline stretched out in clean lines, glass reflecting sunlight, movement constant and indifferent to what had just happened inside this building. He stood there for a moment, looking out, not to escape the room, but to place it in a larger context. This building was one of many. This system was part of something bigger. And what had been exposed today did not belong to a single address. Behind him, the room remained still, waiting, not for permission, but for direction. Malik turned back, his expression unchanged, his focus sharper. "We are going to do something else," he said. The room leaned in, not physically, but mentally. This was the next layer. "We are going to train for recognition," Malik continued. "Not recognition of faces. Recognition of bias." The phrase settled differently. It was not technical. It was human. The compliance officer paused, then nodded slowly. "That will require a different framework," she said. "Good," Malik replied again. The repetition was not accidental. It reinforced the shift. This was not about maintaining the old system with adjustments. This was about building something new. Back in the lobby, the last traces of tension had faded, but the impact remained. Conversations had turned reflective now, quieter, more thoughtful. Connor Blake had been escorted to a private office for review, not removed with force, not made into a spectacle, but repositioned within a process that would now evaluate him with the same precision he had once applied to others. And for the first time, that evaluation would not be based on assumption. Upstairs, Malik returned to his seat, placing both hands lightly on the table. "This building is not just structure," he said. "It is standard." The room held onto that word. Standard. Because what happened here would not stay here. It would move. It would influence. It would define how every other location under his authority operated moving forward. Malik's voice lowered slightly, but it carried just as far. "And today," he said, "we raised it." No one spoke after that. They did not need to. Because the work had already begun. The room did not celebrate what had just been decided. It absorbed it. Quietly. Completely. Every person at that table understood the weight of what Malik Raines had set into motion. This was no longer about correcting a moment. It was about redefining a system that had been trusted for years without being questioned deeply enough. Malik remained seated now, his posture steady, his presence still commanding without effort. The screens around the room continued to update, each department feeding into the same central shift, each adjustment building on the last. The compliance officer spoke again, her tone more focused now, less reactive. "Initial audit flags are already coming in," she said. 3 additional incidents within the last 90 days at different locations. Similar patterns. Different personnel. Malik did not look surprised. He had expected that. He always did. "Pull them up," he said. The central screen changed instantly, displaying brief summaries. Different cities. Different buildings. Same tone. Same assumption. Same outcome. The room went still again, but this time the silence was not shock. It was confirmation. The pattern was real. The system had allowed it. Malik leaned forward slightly, his eyes moving across each case, not rushing, not skimming, but reading with precision. "This is not isolated," he said. "It is repeated." The words did not carry emotion. They carried conclusion. The legal advisor nodded, her expression tightening. "If we proceed with full transparency," she said, "we will need to prepare for external review as well. Regulatory attention. Public scrutiny." Malik met her gaze without hesitation. "Then we prepare," he said. No hesitation. No hesitation meant no fear. Because this was not about avoiding scrutiny. It was about meeting it with something stronger than defense. The head of operations shifted in his seat, his voice measured but more aligned now. "We can deploy interim protocols immediately," he said. "Require dual verification before denial. No single point of judgment." Malik nodded slightly. "Do it," he said. The decision moved instantly. Across the screens, new directives began populating, notifications being sent to every location under their network. The system was not waiting. It was evolving in real time. Malik stood again, not because he needed to, but because the moment required movement. He walked slowly along the length of the table, his presence passing behind each seat, not overlooking anyone, not rushing past anyone. He stopped briefly behind the compliance officer. "When you review these cases," he said, "do not just look at the decision." She turned slightly toward him, listening closely. "Look at the hesitation before it," Malik continued. "That is where the truth is." She nodded, understanding immediately. Because decisions made in seconds are often built on thoughts formed long before. Malik continued walking, stopping near the far end of the room where the senior analyst Saturday. "You mentioned speed," Malik said. The analyst straightened slightly. "Yes, sir." Malik looked at the screen, then back at him. "We are not slowing the system," Malik said. "We are refining it." The distinction mattered. "Speed without awareness is error," he added. The analyst nodded slowly, the concept settling into place. Malik returned to the head of the table but did not sit immediately. He looked at the footage again, now minimized in the corner of the main display, still running in silent loop. The moment repeated. The words repeated. But now, in this room, they no longer held power. They held meaning. "There is one more step," Malik said. The room focused again. This was the part that would define everything that followed. "We are going to bring this into the open," he said. The statement landed with quiet intensity. The head of investor relations leaned forward slightly. "You mean a public release?" he asked. Malik nodded once. "Not a statement," Malik clarified. "The footage." The room absorbed that. This was not controlled messaging. This was transparency. The legal advisor spoke carefully. "That will expose internal operations." Malik did not look away. "It will expose truth," he said. The correction was precise. The difference was everything. No one argued after that. Because the direction was clear. This was not about protecting the company from the moment. It was about aligning the company with what the moment revealed. Malik finally sat, placing his hands on the table again, steady, grounded. "We do not hide from this," he said. "We build from it." The phrase shifted the final layer of hesitation out of the room. Departments began coordinating immediately, legal preparing frameworks, communications aligning timelines, compliance finalizing documentation. The system was moving forward, not backward. Back in the lobby, the space had returned to motion, but not to ignorance. People moved with more awareness now, their interactions more deliberate, their assumptions quieter. The receptionist greeted each person with a measured clarity that had not been there before. Daniel Harris stood near the elevators for a moment longer before finally stepping inside, his mind still turning over what he had witnessed, knowing he would carry that moment with him far beyond this building. Upstairs, Malik watched the room come alive with purpose, each person now part of something larger than their role. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The system was already aligned. The direction was already set. And as the screens continued to update, as the decisions moved outward beyond that room, one thing had become clear to everyone present. What happened downstairs was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a change that would reach far beyond those glass doors. The decision did not stay inside the room. It moved. Fast. Not rushed, not chaotic, but precise in the way only a system fully aligned can be. Within minutes, internal channels lit up across every location under Malik Rains's authority. Notifications appeared on secure dashboards. Policy updates replaced older protocols. Flags were activated. What had been discussed at that table was no longer a plan. It was active. In the conference room, the communications lead stepped forward, tablet in hand, her voice steady but sharpened by the urgency of execution. "We are ready to release the footage on your signal," she said. Malik looked at the screen in front of him, where the paused image still held Connor mid-sentence, the moment frozen in a version of reality that no longer existed. He did not respond immediately. He let the room sit in that silence for one more second. Because once this moved outside, it would not come back the same way. "Include the full context," Malik said. "No edits. No cuts." The communications lead nodded. "Understood." Across the table, the legal advisor added, "We will attach the audit initiation and policy changes as part of the release. That will establish intent and direction." Malik gave a slight nod. That mattered. This was not exposure for reaction. This was exposure with purpose. The head of investor relations leaned in, his tone more aligned now than earlier. "Timing will matter," he said. "If we release during peak hours, the reach will be immediate." Malik's eyes shifted toward him. "Do not time truth," he said calmly. "Release it." The room adjusted instantly. There would be no delay. No strategic hesitation. The communications lead tapped her screen once. "Pushing now," she said. The moment left the room. It moved into networks, into feeds, into timelines that did not ask for permission before reacting. Within seconds, the footage began to appear across platforms. First internally. Then externally. The lobby scene. The words. The stillness. The shift. The override. It was all there. Unfiltered. Upstairs, the room remained quiet, but not still. Screens began tracking engagement in real time. Numbers climbed. Views increased. Shares multiplied. But Malik did not look at any of it. He did not measure the moment by reaction. He measured it by alignment. "Compliance," he said. The officer looked up immediately. "Yes, sir." "Begin external reporting coordination," Malik continued. "If regulators ask, we respond with full transparency." She nodded. Already in motion. The system was ahead again. Always ahead when the direction was clear. Back in the lobby, the ripple returned. Phones buzzed. Screens lit up. People who had just witnessed the moment now saw it. Again, this time through their own devices, through angles they had not noticed, through perspectives that made the truth even clearer. The man in the grey suit looked down at his phone, then back up at the space where it had happened. "It is everywhere already," he said quietly. The receptionist glanced at her screen, then at her phone, her expression shifting from awareness to realization. This was no longer contained. This was visible. Daniel Harris stepped out of the elevator on the 10th floor, his phone in his hand, the footage already playing. He watched it again, even though he had been there, even though he had seen it with his own eyes. Because now, it carried a different weight. It was not just something he experienced. It was something the world was about to see. Back upstairs, the communications lead spoke again. "Initial response is strong," she said. "High engagement. Immediate commentary." Malik remained still. "Monitor," he said. "Not to control. To understand." Across the screens, responses began to appear. Words. Reactions. Support. Reflection. Some questioned. Many recognized. The pattern that had been identified in that room was not new to the outside world. It was familiar. And now, it had proof attached to it. The legal advisor glanced at Malik. "This will draw more than attention," she said. "It will draw expectation." Malik nodded once. "Good," he replied again. Because expectation, when met with action, becomes trust. And trust was not built in silence. It was built in moments like this. He stood again, walking slowly toward the window, the city still moving as it always had, unaware of the shift taking place inside one of its towers. But it would not stay unaware for long. Malik looked out over the skyline, then back at the room. "What we released," he said, "was not a mistake." The room listened. He finished the thought. It was a mirror. The word settled deep. Because mirrors do not create truth. They reveal it. And now, that truth was no longer contained within a single lobby, a single building, or a single moment. It was moving outward, carried by every screen, every share, every person who saw themselves in what had been exposed. Malik returned to the table, his presence steady, his direction unchanged. "Now we match it," he said. The room understood immediately. Action had to follow visibility. Systems had to match statements. Reality had to match expectation. And as the data continued to rise, as the world outside began to respond, one thing became clear to everyone in that room. This was not just a story being told. This was a standard being set in real time. The reaction did not slow down. It spread. Across cities, across networks, across people who had never stepped inside the building but understood exactly what they were seeing. The footage continued to move, carried by voices that had been waiting for something like this to point to, something clear, something undeniable. In the conference room, the screens no longer just showed numbers. They showed patterns forming in real time. Comments repeating the same phrase in different words. Stories surfacing. Experiences aligning. What had been identified inside that room was now being confirmed outside of it, at a scale no internal audit could ever capture alone. Malik Rain stood still for a moment, watching the shift unfold without chasing it, without reacting to every spike or response. He was not measuring success by how loud the moment became. He was measuring it by how clearly it translated. The communications lead stepped closer, her voice steady but carrying the weight of what they were seeing. "Major outlets are picking it up," she said. "They are not just showing the clip. They are asking about the system behind it." Malik nodded slightly. That was the right question. Not what happened. Why it happened. The legal advisor followed. "We are receiving formal inquiries already," she said. "Requests for comment, requests for policy breakdown, requests for internal review documentation." Malik turned his head just enough to acknowledge her. "Give them everything we said we would," he replied. No hesitation. No filtering. Because once truth is released, anything less than full alignment weakens it. The compliance officer spoke next, her tone sharper now, more focused. Audit expansion is complete across all locations, she said. Initial findings are consistent with what we expected. Discretion is being exercised unevenly. Malik did not interrupt. He listened, absorbing each update, each confirmation. Begin corrective enforcement immediately, he said. Not recommendations. Enforcement. The distinction shifted the room again. This was no longer analysis. This was action. Across the system, alerts updated again. Mandatory verification protocols locked into place. Overrides restricted. Every decision now required alignment with identity, not perception. The building was no longer adjusting. It was recalibrating. Back in the lobby, the space had transformed completely. Not physically, but in how it was held. The receptionist greeted each person with direct eye contact now, her tone clear, her process precise. No hesitation. No assumption. Daniel Harris stood near a glass wall on the 10th floor, his phone still in his hand, watching the responses continue to rise. He saw comments that mirrored his own thoughts, words that matched what he had felt but had never said out loud. He looked back toward the elevator, toward the path Malik had taken, and for the first time, he understood that what he had witnessed was not rare. It was revealed. Connor Blake sat in a private office now, not confined, not restrained, but positioned within a process that was unfolding around him. A tablet sat on the table in front of him, displaying the same footage, the same system logs, the same timeline. He watched it again, this time without authority, without interruption, without the ability to step in and redirect it. Just observation. Just truth. His expression did not show anger. It showed recognition. Upstairs, Malik returned to the table, placing both hands lightly on the surface, grounding the room again. This is where most systems stop, he said. The room listened closely. They expose the issue, he continued, and then they wait. He paused, letting the thought settle. We do not wait. The words moved through the room like a final alignment. Because waiting allows patterns to return. Waiting allows perception to rebuild itself quietly. Malik looked at each person at the table, not scanning, not evaluating, but connecting. We move while it is visible, he said. We correct while it is understood. The compliance officer nodded immediately. The legal advisor adjusted her notes. The communications lead updated her timeline. Every department shifted forward again, not reacting, but leading. Malik stepped away from the table one more time, walking toward the center of the room, his presence anchoring the moment. What people are seeing right now, he said, is not just a mistake being corrected. He let the silence hold for a second. They are seeing a system choose to change. That was the difference. And that difference was what would define everything that followed. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, unaware of how many people were now watching, thinking, remembering. Inside, the building moved with new precision, every interaction shaped by what had been exposed. Malik stopped, his posture steady, his voice calm but final. We do not control what they take from this, he said. But we control what we build after it. The room held onto that. Because that was the part that lasted. Not the moment. Not the footage. The structure that followed. And as the screens continued to update, as the responses continued to rise, as the system continued to shift, one thing had become undeniable. This was no longer about what happened in a lobby. It was about what happens next, everywhere. The room did not need another command. It needed a conclusion. Not an ending, but a direction that would carry beyond the walls, beyond the systems, beyond the moment that had started everything. Malik Rain stood at the center of it all, not elevated, not separated, but clearly the point everything now aligned to. The screens around the room continued to move, data flowing, updates confirming, responses building across networks that stretched far outside the building. But Malik did not look at the numbers. He looked at the people. Because systems move through people. Always have. Always will. The compliance officer closed her tablet for a moment, not because the work was done, but because the structure was now set. The legal advisor leaned back slightly, her notes complete, her next steps already in motion. The communications lead lowered her screen just enough to look up, no longer tracking reactions, but understanding them. This was no longer a moment being managed. It was a standard being established. Malik took a slow breath, not out of fatigue, not out of pressure, but out of clarity. He had seen this before. Not the scale. Not the reach. But the moment where something invisible becomes visible, and once seen, can never return to what it was. He stepped forward slightly, his voice calm, grounded, carrying without force. "This is where most stories end," he said. The room listened. Not because they had to, but because they understood what he meant. Exposure. Reaction. Correction. Then silence. He paused, just long enough for that familiar pattern to settle in their minds. "But this is not a story," Malik continued. "This is structure." The distinction landed deeper than anything else he had said. Because stories fade. Structures remain. He turned. Slightly, gesturing toward the screens, toward the data, toward the system now actively reshaping itself in real time. "What we change today does not stay here," he said. "It moves through every decision, every interaction, every space we control." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. They were precise. And precision carries further than volume ever could. Across the table, the head of operations nodded slowly, understanding the scope now not as a task, but as a responsibility. The compliance officer met Malik's gaze, not seeking approval, but aligned with the direction. The legal advisor closed her folder completely. The communications lead set her tablet down. No one needed to speak. Because the work ahead was already understood. Malik took one step back, not retreating, but allowing the room to hold itself without him filling every space. That was leadership? Not control. Direction. He looked around one last time, not to check, not to confirm, but to recognize. Every person in that room had shifted. Not just in role. In awareness. An awareness, once changed, does not return quietly. "What happened downstairs," Malik said, his voice softer now but no less clear, "was not power." He let the room sit with that for a second. It was exposure. The word settled fully this time. Because power had never been in the denial. It had always been in the truth that followed it. Malik turned toward the window again, the city stretching out beyond the glass, unaware of how many systems inside it operated the same way until someone chose to see them clearly. He spoke again, not turning back this time. "You do not need to raise your voice to correct a system," he said. "You need to understand it." The sentence carried weight beyond the room, beyond the building, beyond the moment. Because that was the lesson. Not reaction. Not confrontation. Clarity. Behind him, the room remained still, not frozen, but focused. Ready. Malik finally turned back, his expression unchanged, his presence steady. "And once you understand it," he added, "you change it." That was it. No dramatic ending. No final command. Just truth, placed exactly where it needed to be. The kind that does not need repetition because it stays. The screens continued to move. The systems continued to adjust. The world outside continued to respond. But inside that room, inside that building, inside. Every person who had witnessed what happened from the lobby to this moment, something had already settled into place. Not loud. Not visible. But permanent. Malik Rains did not need to say anything else. Because the proof was no longer in his words. It was in what had already been done. And that is the kind of ending that does not end at all.